I finished the Honkai Star Rail Fate collab story on stream yesterday, and honestly, it seems like pretty much everyone agrees the story was mid. Not terrible, not broken, just kinda there. Honkai Star Rail has had this same flavor of storytelling since 1.0. A slow, overly wordy build-up, a couple quirky side characters doing the usual bit, and then maybe, just maybe, we get one cinematic moment that slaps. I think a lot of us forget that because so many players came to this game as Genshin refugees looking for something fresh, a new home, new cast, new writing. And don't get me wrong, when the 5 to 10 second cutscenes do hit, they are peak, but it always comes after slogging through walls of mid just to get a glimpse of that potential payoff. See, here's the thing, Fate knows what it is. It's always been bold with its writing. Characters have real ideologic clashes. There's weight behind every decision, and even when the story gets convoluted, it never feels like it's afraid to challenge the viewer. Meanwhile, Honkai Star Rail plays it safe. Hoyoverse is so focused on clean production value and mass market appeal that they sacrifice any sense of urgency or narrative tension. In Unlimited Blade Works, when characters argue about ideas, you feel that tension in your chest. In the collab, characters feel like they're just reciting lines on opposite sides of a collab table, like it's an awkward business meeting with cosplay. And that's the problem. Fate is built around characters who fight for what they believe in. Every clash means something, but in Star Rail, especially during events, everything feels like it's written with gloves on, like the writers are afraid to go deep because it might alienate someone or complicate the event too much. This collab was a perfect opportunity to take two strong narrative worlds and see what happens when they collide, not just in combat, but in philosophy. Ohoyo doesn't collide things, they gently place them next to each other, smile, and move on. There's no real stakes, no clever twists that link Fate's themes with Star Rail's core narrative. Instead of a true fusion of Fate and Star Rail, we just get a glorified showcase. It feels more like a brand partnership than a narrative crossover. And that brings us to the bigger picture, right? The bigger issue. Star Rail's storytelling, it's stuck. Don't get me wrong though. There are amazing moments, especially in like character side stories like Kafka's arc, Blade's lore, deep and intriguing, right? But the main story has barely evolved in tone or structure since launch. It's still bogged down by overly long dialogue, slow pacing, and exposition dumps that suck the energy out of otherwise cool ideas. And worst of all, every event, including this collab, follows the same formula. Quirky intro, light conflict, basic boss, resolution, no consequences, no big swings, just rinse and repeat. If you were expecting this collab to break the mold or do something bold, that's kinda on you, because Star Rail hasn't earned that kind of expectation yet. I would say the biggest tragedy here is how much potential was left on the table. Fate is a franchise built on deep philosophical themes. Fate versus free will, heroism, sacrifice, identity. Honkai Star Rail explores a lot of those same ideas. Imagine if Saber had a real philosophical clash with the Aeons, or if the collab dug into how fate works in the Star Rail universe. Imagine if the Stellaron hunters met the masters or servants and we saw some ideological tension. None of that happened. And it's a shame because the lore was there. The characters were there, the pieces were all in place. Here's the honest truth. Hoyo doesn't treat events as story expansions, they treat them as temporary distractions. You log in, collect some crystals, play a themed minigame. I will say though, I truly did enjoy the combat event. There's a lot of intricate like combos there, like stealing buffs from your opponent. They have their buffs, you have your buffs, you have to defeat the enemies in a certain amount of waves, otherwise you take a big hit to your like HP. that seemed more fleshed out than like the actual story, right? So that event was like the combat part of it was actually like a cook. I truly enjoyed that, and I give like an 8 out of 10, or even potentially even like a 9 out of 10. You really think about it, this makes sense from a live service business standpoint. It's a low risk, high reward. But from a storytelling perspective, it's creative flatline. It's not just a Fate problem. I personally enjoyed Ethereum Wars. I think it's the greatest event Honkai Star Rail has ever had. But when it comes to like the Pentaconi wrap up, the Bronya event, that whole thing, it's flashy, fun, but it's ultimately forgettable. At this point, I think we need to accept that Hoyoverse isn't trying to tell deep game-changing stories with their events. They're trying to sell vibes. The animation, gorgeous. The music, most of the time it's a banger. Character models, flashy ultimates, most of the time very stunning. But once the shine fades, there's not much left underneath. That's why we keep getting these beautifully presented yet emotionally hollow events. It's the illusion of depth, enough to keep people engaged on social media, enough for hype trailers and reaction clips, but not enough to stay with you once it's over. And look, that's not always a bad thing. Not every piece of content needs to reinvent the wheel. But when you bring in a franchise like Fate with characters who carry decades of lore and emotional weight, you can't just plug them into the same formula and expect it to work. Instead of asking, what would Saber actually think of the world of Aeons, or how would these universes truly interact? How can we insert her into the event without disrupting our template? That's the issue. Hoyo's addicted to templates. They have a formula that works, so they copy paste it across everything. And when you try to fit something like Fate into that mold, it just ends up feeling neutered. So if you're frustrated by this collab, I get it, but it's time to adjust expectations. Unless Hoyo changes their approach to storytelling, especially in time-limited events, we're gonna keep getting these pretty hollow experiences. Cool models, slick animations, no soul. We all want more depth, but that's not where Hoyo's priorities are, right? They're chasing mass appeal, not narrative innovation. Fate Collab was mid. Not because it was poorly made, but because it was playing by the same rules Hoyo always follows. And until that changes, don't expect the next big crossover to feel any different. Let me know in the comments, were you let down by the Fate event, or was it just about what you expected? Either way, don't forget to like, sub, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.